And so welcome everyone. I'm Catherine Lawrence. I'm with the Science Gateways Community Institute, where I oversee the community engagement and exchange area. And I'm just going to give you a few guidelines about today's webinar and some background about SGCI. So we'd like you to keep your audio and video, well, I guess we can't see you anyway, but keep your audio muted, but we can unmute you if you have a question that requires talking instead of posting questions. But we encourage you to submit questions at any time using the Q&A option that's at the bottom of your window. And we might unmute you to confirm that you feel like your question has been answered. We also have chat if you have any technical problems or questions or issues. But throughout the presentation, Vas will be presenting, but Greg will be answering some questions using Q&A, and then we'll save other questions for the end. We also will be recording this, and we'll post the recording and the slides afterwards on our website. So next, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Science Gateways Community Institute. We're funded by the National Science Foundation to provide support to gateway projects and to build the community of people involved with gateways, which includes Globus, of course. So we do that in three main areas. The services that we include have support for building and running gateways. This includes hands-on software development, as well as consultants who can provide advice about things like usability and sustainability and cybersecurity. We also have a catalog of gateways and software. So if your catalog isn't, or if your gateway is not listed there yet, or your software that's used for building gateways, we encourage you to do that. Globus is one of the project software components that is listed on that catalog, and it's a great way to find resources for building your gateway without reinventing certain technologies. Our second main area is through education and training, which of course includes this webinar series. We have a program called Focus Week, which lately has been virtual and will be virtual coming up in November, December. That provides an intensive opportunity to think about the sustainability of your gateway and aspects that you may not think about beyond technology. We also have a number of student-focused programs, including an internship program that is both summer and academic year internships. And finally, we have a lot of resources on our website, which I encourage you to visit. And then in our third area of services, we have an annual conference. You may have noticed on the first slide that there is encouragement to join this year's annual conference, which will be online. It is spread over a couple of weeks. It includes actually a tutorial by Globus during the first week. So the first week is all tutorials, and the second week is the main track of the conference. And you can find out more at sciencegateways.org/gateways2020. And it's very affordable. It's $100. And if you don't have that in your budget, you can, if your money is frozen, we have registration support available. Also, we have a Google group that's a community forum that you can join if you want to pose questions about things that are particularly thorny. We encourage you to have a look at that and join. And we also have 2 ambassadors programs you can read about on our website, and partners and affiliates programs that are ways of both sharing information about what you have to offer, as well as helping direct people to software and resources that might be helpful for their projects. And finally, you know, everybody has news and blogs and job postings on their websites, but we rely on you to provide that information. So we hope that you will send us your news, and if you want to volunteer to do a guest blog, we will totally welcome that. So the last thing I just want to say is we are funded by the National Science Foundation to offer this for free, and we like to show that it's been helpful to people. So I will be posting this link in the chat towards the end of this webinar or partway through, and I really hope that you will consider giving us some feedback. You also, through that form, can suggest additional topics. So if there are topics that you want to volunteer for, or that you would like to see, you can put that there as well. It's just a 30-second kind of evaluation. So with that, I'm going to let our presenters get set up with their slides. And I'm really pleased to, again, invite Globus to give a webinar for us. They've done this before, although it hasn't been Vas before. But so our two presenters will be Vasiliadis, got that there at that time, and Greg Nawrocki. Got tongue twisted, but hey. So Vas and Greg both are part of the Globus team, which is based at the University of Chicago, I think, if I'm understanding correctly. Yes, and I think you're in for a really great time as they share their expertise with you. So I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks to the Gateways team for inviting us to present. I'm going to start with some disclaimers because I'm in a multi-generational household with a dog. So if you hear strange background noises, do your best to ignore them as I will. And I see a few familiar faces in the attendee list. So apologies if some of this upfront stuff is old hat to you, but hopefully we'll all learn something today. So as Catherine said, Globus is a service that's developed and operated by the University of Chicago. We're actually just a department at the university, although sometimes folks think of us as a separate company or software company. But that's in some ways it's by design, because we do try to deliver software and services that will help researchers do their work better at scale. And do so sustainably. So we have a sustainability model that we've been working on over the years, and it's starting to take hold. So that's been gratifying. So service has been around about 10 years. Actually, this will be our 10-year anniversary at supercomputing this year, even though unfortunately it will be virtual. Otherwise, we might have had some cake in our booth or something. But we do have a lot of researchers around the world using the service. We're at last count in over 80 countries. Greg can probably give us a more accurate count. He keeps track of all these things. But it's a service that at its core is about moving data and making data more accessible to folks, irrespective of the system they're using. So a lot of what Globus does is provide sort of a unified view of different types of storage systems and allow folks to sort of browse their data and move them across those systems. And very importantly, to also share those data with their collaborators, in particular those that might not have access to those systems. So if your institution has a Globus endpoint set up, and you're working with someone at another institution that doesn't have accounts at your university or whatever, you can just use Globus to allow them to get access to your data in your project. And it's all with very fine-grained access control and security, and really just works. It doesn't require jumping through administrative hoops to set up accounts and then have those things managed and so on. So those are really sort of the core services that most folks use. And I mentioned we connect a lot of different types of systems, sort of make them all look the same from the perspective of the end user. This is just a current list of some of the systems that you can get connectors for and deploy, in addition to just sort of standard POSIX style file systems, which are everywhere. And we have a few more in development. In particular, we're actually very close to releasing a connector for iRods, and we also have OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive in the works, because I know a lot of campuses are starting to use OneDrive more extensively over some of the other cloud storage systems. So the service, as I said, has been around a while, and it has a lot of users, and the majority of those users use what we call our web app. It's a web interface. It's a sort of a point and click thing, right? So you can find your endpoint, select your data, click the start button and move data, click the share button and share data, and so on. But increasingly, what we've seen is that, especially with things like instruments generating, very large and growing amounts of data, as resolutions go up on beamlines and microscopes and so on, is the need to automate a lot of these processes, because it's just not scalable when you're running, when you're running 1,000 scans on a sample and getting tens of thousands of images. To actually move those and analyze them and do various things with them and share the data with others is very challenging. And we don't want folks spending time, managing data and doing mundane, tasks like that, where they could actually be doing real research, right? So one of the other interfaces to the service is a command line interface. And so you can install, essentially, it's a set of Python scripts. For anyone that's familiar with things like the AWS CLI or some of the Google CLI tools, very similar idea. You install these tools on your laptop, on your server, wherever, and then you can access the service using the command line. And again, the same security model applies. So when you first try and access the service, you log in. You get back what we call access tokens and potentially refresh tokens, such that you can continue to run scripts or have scripts run unattended over time without requiring a human in the loop. And these are just, here's just a couple screenshots of what it looks like when you're on the command line. You just run, in this case, I'm running a Globus ls command, so I'm listing the files and directories on an endpoint. I'm running another command where I'm listing the number of shared endpoints. So as I said, we can share data, which essentially means I'm creating these sort of overlays on the file system that give specific permissions to specific groups. So here I'm showing half a dozen groups or so that I've created shares for and shared specific sort of subsets of my data on an endpoint. And then even more importantly, I can do things like transfer data. So here's an example of a transfer request that I submitted, say Globus transfer, and then source and destination, and you can do recursive things and all the things you might expect if you're used to tools like rsync and so on. And you can check the status of the transfers and what have you. So essentially any function that you can perform through the web interface, you can perform through the command line. And in fact, there are additional options that make it a lot more useful, especially if you're building this into your own scripts. So some examples of where this becomes really useful. We see, as I said earlier, a lot of use cases around instrument data, where you need to pull data off of an instrument, send it somewhere for analysis, or put it somewhere else for other folks to access. So being able to get the data off an instrument as quickly as possible, but also reliably, right? Because in some cases you can't very easily replicate some of these experiments or at all. So you want to make sure that you can get it off the instrument quickly, and then also make sure that access to the data are controlled appropriately, and then yet allow your collaborators and others to get at those data in their own time. And another common example is sort of perhaps maybe downstream in the research workflow. You might have some data that you want to publish through a gateway, a science gateway, or a data portal, or some other type of app. Again, where you will have a diverse set of folks coming to access that data. You can do that again using the same mechanisms, and you can also allow things like access via HTTPS. So you don't have to necessarily use the Globus third-party transfer mechanism that is sort of at the core of the service. You can just point and click on the browser and pull data down. And then another common scenario for automation, as you might imagine, is if you're running HPC type workloads, you can use the Globus command line to call out to the Globus service and stage data in, then run your workload, and then come back out and stage the results out, set permissions for who can access, and so on. And so if you want to do what I call sort of lightweight automation, the Globus command line interface is a great way to do that. We have a ton of examples on our GitHub repo. This is just a subset here that I'm showing on this slide. So if you go to github.com/Globus, you'll see various repositories there with different types of scripts. Some are shell, bash scripts, some are Python scripts, and the whole host of different use cases that you can address using those bits. And again, this is all open source code that you can go and have at and adapt as needed. So that's great for a number of different use cases, but scripting really only gets us so far, because when you get to a certain scale, you just want things to run unattended, all the time, perhaps with additional sort of pieces inside of the flow. So that's where you really need to go down to the next level, if you will, and use some of the platform services that we offer. So everything that I mentioned up to this point that's accessible via the web app as well as the command line is actually has sort of a back-end service, if you will, with a REST API typically. So at the core of everything that we do is some level of security, actually multiple levels of security. So we have a service called Globus Auth, which provides identity and access management and really underpins everything else, access to all other resource types in the platform. And sort of somewhat related to that is a group service that allows you to, for instance, grant permissions to things based on groups instead of having to do it on a per user basis, which again, doesn't scale very well. So the other core services, of course, the transfer service, Globus Connect, which is the thing that you install on your endpoint, on your storage system to make it accessible via Globus. Those have been there a long time. A new one that's in development right now is a manifest service. So you can think of this as a way to sort of logically define a collection of data that in some cases may be spread over multiple endpoints, but you can actually treat a logical set of data as a unit and then pass that around, transfer it, share it, and so on, and ensure data integrity by checking things like checksums in the manifest for all the data items and so on. So that's something that is coming and is very useful in the context of these automated flows, where you don't want to be worrying about specific directory names and file names and paths and so on. Also, really central to a lot of what we're doing with these platform services and helping people automate is a service called Search, which allows you to pull some metadata into Globus, into the Globus search service that describes your data sets, and then you can turn around and enable users to search the metadata based on facets. So if you're familiar with sort of like the AWS website, the Amazon shopping website, right, where you're searching for a product and you get the different attributes, the facets listed on the left, and you can selectively sort of narrow down your choices. That's the type of thing that you can facilitate with the search service. So it really simplifies discovery of data by others in the community. So this is, I think, a really important bit for anyone who's building gateways and portals where they're going to be sharing, data sets with diverse constituencies. And in some cases, you may want to explicitly identify data sets using a more persistent identifier, like a DOI or something like that. So there is a way to do that as well, and we're working on some of that in conjunction with the data site team. And then at the bottom of the list here, I have flows, which is really the core of what I'm going to talk about for most of the time we have left here, which is the next thing that we're putting our efforts into. And what we really, so this is our current focus for development, and what we envisage and what we're building is a system that can automate data management across diverse systems and instruments, and allow for human intervention when required, but do it in a way that's highly scalable, with, again, the appropriate levels of security and access control that apply to all of the other Globus platform services. So we're calling this Globus Automate. So it's again, it's another platform service where you can define and in some cases share these things that we call flows. So you think of data flows, right? So data may be flowing to different places, but there's additional bits in there where you can do various compute tasks. You can have user input through web forms and so on. So these flows are triggered based on certain events. So an example might be data coming off an instrument triggers a flow that then sends data somewhere, runs an analysis, what have you. And these events will be processed using these things called action providers. So we've built a number of these action providers that will perform discrete tasks. And as you can see on the bottom here is sort of a stylized example where you can sort of link a whole bunch of these tasks together in a flow, and each of the tasks is executed by perhaps a different action provider, depending on what the task is. So that's sort of at a very high level. The way this is built is leveraging a lot of the features provided by the Amazon Step Function service, right? So this is sort of a declarative thing where you specify using just a structured JSON language. You specify what the flow looks like. You can do the things you'd sort of expect in any kind of flow engine, like conditional paths and loops and so on. And the service maintains the state of all the various resources in the flow so that you can pass those between different steps and different action providers. And again, all of this is secured with Globus Auth. So some of the action providers that we've built so far and have in use in a couple of examples that I'm going to talk about shortly. Obviously, there's the ability to transfer. So there's a transfer action provider, which essentially just calls out to the Globus transfer service to execute a transfer, right? And then here's examples of identify a user form is something that will allow users to intervene and provide some input. Ingest for pulling data for extracting metadata and ingesting that into the search service and so on. And then very importantly, we've designed the service in such a way that it allows the community to develop their own action providers and contribute those or make those available to their groups, so you can extend the functionality and the richness of this platform. Because obviously we can't hope to build action providers for everything ourselves, but we have made a start towards some things that we see a lot of value in. So one of those is a service called Funkex. So setting aside the funky name, you can think of this as, for those that are familiar with serverless computing or with Amazon, things like that, you can think of this as sort of running lambdas on supercomputers. Is sort of my mental pithy statement that I have when I talk about this. But really what we're trying to do with this service is to transform cloud computing, HPC clusters, supercomputers into these function serving systems. So you can simply deploy this Funkex service on an endpoint, and then that transforms, or that enables that computer, whatever type of computer it is, to serve functions. So you can run arbitrarily complex code, be it Python or whatever, in containers. So I'm showing down here that these code bits are actually wrapped inside of Singularity containers, but we have plans to support other container models as well. But the idea is that you can have this code that's portable across different types of classes of computing resources, and you can access them via cloud APIs. You can access it via an HPC scheduler and so on. And again, all of this is secured by Globus Auth. So that determines who can run what, where, who has access to certain containers and functions and so on. So this is a service that's actually currently in what we call Globus Labs. So that's sort of the basic research side of Globus at the university. So we've developed this, continue to develop it. It's in use in a number of sort of early pilots. And at some point, I expect this will be more generally available to the Globus community. Another external, if you will, action provider that I want to talk about just briefly, again, this is another one that's in development in Globus Labs, is the extract service. So the idea here is that you want to typically automate the extraction of metadata, in some cases other types of content, from data coming, again, I'm showing an example here of data coming off an instrument. So you want to automate the process of extracting that and then pushing it out to some type of catalog. In many cases, that will be the Globus search service, so that people can go ahead and discover those data sets. And it's a particularly interesting service because when you think about doing metadata extraction at scale, you need to sort of trade off whether that extraction is going to happen sort of right at the source or sort of on the edges, or in some centralized service. And there's trade-offs there based on, for instance, if you're working on data coming off of an instrument, you may not have the compute power to do the extraction, or the compute power may be limited, and you may be sort of hampering the operation of the instrument if you're spending a lot of time extracting metadata in that context. So perhaps you want to do that in some centralized service, whereas in some other cases, perhaps the central service is distant off an unreliable network. So you want to do that extraction at the edge and then push it out to the catalog at some subsequent point. So these are the kinds of things that you can call on in the course of a flow to sort of help you, again, describe, store, categorize, move data, and so on. And I want to spend a little bit of time next talking about some examples. I mentioned we have some pilot systems in place that are using these services. So one that's been around a little while is the Neurocartography project that's run by Bobby Kasturi, who is essentially trying to map the brain, right? So trying to build a mapping of the neurons in the brain and the connections between them. And so the way they do that is they use the Advanced Photon Source to take thousands of images on brain sections. Right now they're doing this on rats primarily because it is a destructive modality, but they're generating these large data sets that are then being made available to the community for doing all sorts of interesting downstream analyses. So the way the process works is the imaging gets done at the Advanced Photon Source. There are some machines that are tied to the beamline that get the data and just do some initial pre-processing. Then that data is passed over to the ALCF, the Oregon Leadership Computing Facility, where some initial reconstruction is done. A user may look at that to determine whether or not the beamline is properly aligned, focus, etc., and some adjustments might be made. And then once the data are run through at scale, additional analysis is done to sort of reconstruct those images. And then metadata are extracted and then it's pushed out to a data portal called Petrel, which I'll show you a little bit later on. And then those are available for other scientists to visualize, and as Bobby Kasturi says, science happens. So we hope. So that's sort of a classic example of where the Automate service is used. So here is the corresponding flow, if you will, right? So you see the transfer of the data initially. There's Funkex used to run a job. There's perhaps some user input that's adding some additional data. There's a metadata extraction step. In some cases, they're assigning persistent identifiers to these data sets and so on, and then making it available for search. So that's one example. Another one, again, that's also using the APS. This is the XPCS, photon correlation spectroscopy, I'm sorry. So this is where essentially the researchers are studying the dynamics in a material at a very low sort of a nanoscale by looking at different a time series of slices of sort of images in the material. And so what they need to do is pull a set of these images off the beamline, run them through some software. They use a version of the Eigen software, and again they run this on some large machines at the ALCF. So they pull they do the correlation of the images, and then they plot out the results. Again, extract some metadata and then publish it out for others to perform various analyses. And again, a similar flow here, except you've got transfer of different types with some a sequence of analyses that are run. And then depending on the nature of the data, you see one of the last steps he has to set policy, because certain data sets are maybe publicly or more openly available versus others that might be available only to a subset of folks, perhaps just the immediate project team while the work is in progress. And the third example I'd like to talk about just briefly is the materials data facility. This is arguably the one that has the most complex flows, automation flows in place today. So the idea behind the MDF is that they're sourcing data sets about materials from many different sources. So folks can submit their data set for inclusion in the MDF. That submission kicks off a flow whereby someone reviews the data set, it gets metadata gets extracted, perhaps enriched by the addition of other bits and other data, and then again it gets identified and pushed out to a portal that can be accessed. And so this has been running for quite some time. Ben Blasek is the lead on this project, and I don't know how current these numbers are, but they have many tens of terabytes of data, and I think this 400 data sets has probably grown substantially since we put the slide together. So this has been ongoing. This is the flow here. You can see it is a little more complex. This uses the extract service to pull metadata, and you can see here clearly on the right side there are some manual steps. So again, Automate is about automating tests, but also allowing user intervention where it's required as part of these flows. So in this case, there's a curation step where someone is notified that they need to look at data and sort of make sure everything is fine before it gets pushed further down this pipeline and gets published out for others to access. And I've mentioned that a lot of this data is pushed out and published via data portals. One such example is petroldata.net. So this is something that we've built over the past year and a half, a couple of years now, where it's actually a collection of different portals where a lot of these experiments are able to publish their data or put their data out there for discovery, again, either by the rest of the project team or perhaps more broadly by some other community. I'm actually going to switch over just briefly to show you that that switch worked, and you can see my my browser here. So this is what the portal looks like. Again, all of this is underpinned using the Globus Auth security model. So I'm going to log in here with my credentials, which I need to get from my password manager since I don't remember any passwords anymore. Let's see. Oops. Okay, I'm just going to try it this way. See if that works. Okay, so I'm logged in here, and you'll see the different access models for these sort of sub portals, if you will, right? So I mentioned the Neurocartography portal, right? That's the mapping the brain, the materials data facility. So you can see some of these are private. So you need, if I were to try and access this, I would be prompted to request access. So this would notify someone who could perhaps grant me access to that project. But I'll just go to one that actually has public data, which is this materials data facility, right? And here you can see an example of the data that's been pushed out here. So there are just shy of 1 million different data sets out here, or records. This is the faceted search that I was talking about earlier. So I can browse and sort of narrow down the scope of what I'm looking for. And then when I find the data set that I want, I can click on the Globus button, and that will just switch me over to Globus and drop me into that data set. And then I can transfer it to my own system somewhere and analyze it and so on. So that's just a quick view into how you get at some of these data sets once they've been pushed out there. Again, this is one example. We have many different examples of these types of data portals or gateways that are being used to make data sets more broadly accessible to the community. So again, as I mentioned, we have this service built as a platform. So the idea is that we and others will develop more and more of these action providers. So we will at some point provide some kind of development toolkit to assist with that. Right now, most of this is being done sort of in-house, if you will. And beyond the platform, we also have plans to do more sort of turnkey software as a service type thing, very similar to what you see in the web app with the Globus transfer service, where we will pull together these flows and sort of pre-package them in a way that just requires some configuration, perhaps. For instance, to decide where your endpoints are, you can just plug those details in, and then just have users run them. So the initial case we're targeting there is this one that I've showed you a couple of times now with instrument data. So you'll be able to put this flow in place and just pull data off certain instruments. And then another example is the ability to do what we call turnkey data management plans, right? So you can select the data that you need to publish, pull some metadata from it, assign a persistent identifier, and then make it available on some endpoint for others to view, and that can be sort of at least one substantial part of your data management plan. So hopefully that's giving you at least an idea of where we're headed with the Globus service, particularly with respect to automation and some of the, I think, very interesting, cool things that we've done so far, and that we'll be in a position to let others do. We're actually, if you do have use cases at your institution where you think this might be of value, please do reach out to us. We're looking for folks to sort of work collaboratively with us to put some of these early pieces in place and try them out and so on. So I'm going to wrap it there. I think we're up at about 15 minutes left for questions. I want to give folks plenty of time to ask their questions. But I do want to thank our funders. So the bulk of the work that's been done in Globus is funded by various national agencies and other foundations. But as I mentioned earlier, we do have a sustainability model that funds our operations. And I do want to thank, this is just a subset of our subscribers, but we do have a number of folks that actually choose to subscribe, and we greatly appreciate that. Makes the service more likely to be around for the long term, which is what we all want. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll open it up to questions.
Great. Yeah, we have a couple questions that came in. One is from Matthew, who said, I'd be interested to know more about how a user can annotate their data with metadata to make them more easily discoverable. Are there any particular metadata schemas that you use for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the decisions that we made right up front with respect to that is that we wouldn't impose or prescribe any particular schema. So I think one of the really interesting and valuable parts of the way that we do search and the way we ingest metadata is to say, just give us your, as my dear friend Steve used to say, just give us your unwashed metadata and we'll make best sense of it, right? So as long as you provide the metadata in a JSON formatted structure that can be ingested by the service, we'll extract the various attributes, the various facets, and do all that for you. And it doesn't have to be aligned with any specific ontology or any specific schema. Of course, you can use those standard schemas and pass this data in those forms because many disciplines do have those pretty well defined. But we didn't want to require people to, adopt, yet another quote unquote standard as far as that goes.
Great, thanks. There was a question that came in from Megan, specifically about the petrol pilot. She was wondering what durability and or length of time storage are you planning for? Is it 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or what?
Yeah, great. So the petrol system is actually in its just going into its second sort of cycle. I believe it's just been refreshed and expanded, or it's in the process of having that done. It has funding for, I'm going to guess 5 years. I'm not quite sure. I can actually check on that. But I think the intent is that will persist, indefinitely, as long as funding can be provided for that system. But that's one example of a centralized storage system operated in this case by Argonne National Lab. But the same portal approach can be put in front of any type of storage system, cloud storage or otherwise. So there's no sort of direct coupling between those two. But I think in the case of petrol, I believe it's initially a 5-year thing.
Okay, great. Yeah. And then Gian says, do you mean that users can provide their metadata schema and the metadata extraction function will automatically extract the metadata from data or data sets?
Yes. In a sense, there's a little bit of work you have to do to define things in the right way. so that the extractors can run. Right now, as I said, a lot of the extraction that we're doing is sort of handcrafted because we haven't got that service to the point where it's sort of more general purpose. But essentially, yes, that's the idea. So you could actually have, you could actually end up with a search index that has, many different types of metadata structured in different ways. In fact, we expect that people will have multiple different search indexes based on the different types of data, perhaps by discipline or by project or what have you, as a result of that structure.
Great, thanks. There are no more questions at the moment, but I wanted to point out a comment that that Mona Wong from SGCI made, and I think, yeah, and she was just pointing out that one of the projects that we worked on, I think that she helped on, it was just Cosmic Squared integrated Globus auth and transfer into the gateway, and she would be happy to answer any questions about that too if people were interested in examples of how this has been done. We have, she put the link in the chat to both the Google group and the our help email. Now Chunhan has just posted a question. Are most of all Globus services available to the gateway developers freely?
Some are available freely. Some do require that you have a subscription. So things like the core transfer service is available freely, but if you wanted to use the search service, you would need a subscription.
That's great, thanks. Oh, and then here's another, oh wow, questions are pouring in. So we have two questions just came in. Megan asks, is there a way to use Globus to make your metadata available to a larger indexing service for data discovery when they are public? For example, Re3 Data? It's Re3 Data is how it's written.
Not at this point. Right now, it's the index is all stored in Globus Search, and so it's indexed by Globus, and it's actually it runs on Elasticsearch. But right now we don't have a way to sort of extract it and then push it out to a different indexing service. Perhaps that's something down the road, if that's a use case that has a lot of applicability.
Great, and oh, she provided a link also. It's the www.re3data.org is a registry of research data repositories. Just so we'll grab that information. There was another question that I guess Greg got to. Yes. I think. Where did it go? It vanished.
Yeah, it's
yes.
in the answered
Okay.
questions, and it was, yeah, what size of the data qualifies for using Globus service? And said, I once tried to register but got questions asking about how big my data size was. And there are no limits. You can register your identity with Globus and use the Globus transfer service free and clear regardless.
Ah, great. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, the risk of having someone else who's so fast that I didn't even catch it. So let's see. So far, there are no other questions that are popping in, but I have a question, which is how do you go about prioritizing or selecting the new features? Because I know this is a lot of the new things that you've been up to lately, and it was spurred in part by Mona's interest in sharing some of the new developments from Globus World. Yeah. So how do you go about finding and implementing solutions for different use cases?
Yeah, sure. So we look at how people are using some of the core services, primarily the transfer and sharing, and then we talk to a lot of our users. I mean, that actually, I think that's what Greg does probably 98% of his day when he's not self-tutoring the kids or whatever nowadays. But that's it's really by listening to what and seeing the types of applications that people have out there, how they're using Globus today, and seeing what else we can add to the service to make it easier for them to manage the data in those flows. And the instrument use case that I mentioned repeatedly, we started seeing a need for pulling data from instruments maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Actually, probably, I mean, the APS one has been there a long time, but we started seeing more of these microscopes and things coming online over the last small number of years, and people kept asking us, hey, I'm using Globus here, but it's kind of kludgy because I'm got this Windows machine, I'm pointing and clicking and doing stuff. Can we do this in some better, more reliable, more automated way? And that's partly the type of discussion that led to us thinking about the automate service, and then sort of generalizing from that type of use case to other types of flows, including computation and so on.
That's really neat. It's interesting to hear, just because I know it's difficult for any kind of software company organization to choose between the millions of things that people are asking them for, right?
And we do still have a million things that people request, and we have a backlog that if Rachana, who sort of owns our product backlog, if she was on, she would be she'd have a lot more to say about that. But we do have a lot of smaller sort of requests about things. A lot of it has to do with improvements to the existing services, and certainly we do try and prioritize those. The connector, a good example of how we prioritize things is on the connectors. So I mentioned, and I showed a list of connectors and some of the others that we're building. The way we sort of prioritize those is based on what people are asking for. Right? So we've had a lot of people asking for iRods over the years, and got to a point where there's a critical mass of people asking for it. We have the resources. We've got collaboration set up with the RENC folks to do that. And likewise with OneDrive, we had push for people to connect to Box because that was largely used within campuses. Now we're seeing some shifts to OneDrive, where people putting OneDrive in addition to other cloud services. So that's where we're focusing our efforts. So in most cases, we're sort of reactive to user needs. In some cases, we try and be a little more proactive by looking at what they're doing instead of thinking ahead and seeing how we can potentially provide additional value.
Great. Yeah, sorry, I've been keeping myself muted because construction vehicles have been roaring by. So anyway, we do have another question here from Alberto, who says, does the search service in Globus run across all Globus nodes? How do you keep it up to date with new nodes being added and removed? Do nodes push content to the search service, or does search pull metadata from the nodes?
No, it's very much a push model. So you push metadata to a search index, and then you can use, so there, it's not like Globus is scanning all these tens of thousands of endpoints that are out there. It's very much a user-driven push model.
Great, thanks. I'm waiting to see if there are any more that come through, but so far no more. What I'll do is, for the moment, since we're getting close to the end of the hour, I'll thank you and Greg for keeping us well informed throughout. Greg in the background and you in the foreground. This is really interesting and helpful. I'm just gonna share my screen for a moment to also mention that we have another webinar coming up in a month. And so hopefully you can see that. So our next webinar is going to be about cybersecurity, the Trustworthy Data Working Group, which has been working together to provide, to figure out more information about providing trustworthy data. So those of you who are interested in Globus may very well find this to be useful as well, given that this is all about data. And Jim Basney from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is going to be presenting that. I will also point out that usually we're the second Wednesday of the month, but for this particular upcoming webinar, because our conference is going to be for 2 weeks, including that second week of the month, this will be on the 7th instead of the 14th. So I hope that you guys, everyone will consider joining that as well as our conference. As I think I mentioned, it is $50 for students and $100 for non-students. And we really encourage you to come and take advantage of all the great stuff that is going to be shared, and we're going to have a lot of takeaways that I think you'll find useful. Good keynotes and plenaries and whatnot. So just looking here to see, we got a bunch of, I don't know if you can see chat right now, Vas, but there's a bunch of happy people coming through who found it very helpful for this webinar. So
I appreciate that.
yeah, I think Globus always does a great job presenting and communicating their information. So I appreciate you joining us for this very much.
Thank you again.
Yeah, so I'm looking, no other questions are coming through. So with that, I think we'll call it a day, and we'll look forward to hearing your, I think Lee is going to present a tutorial at Gateways 2020 about Globus as well. Yep. And someone just wrote in Q&A that they need to start using Automate ASAP, because this is an amazing webinar. Thank you for that positive feedback.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again,
Thank
Greg.
you.